Hi, I'm Jim, and today we're taking a deep dive into what I think is ultimately the single most important thing SIG has to get right with Star Citizen, the economy. Now, of all the games I've ever played, EVE Online had one of the best in-game economies that I've ever experienced. No, it's not perfect, but it is pretty close. In EVE, every mineral is mined by a real player, and those minerals are turned into essentially every item and ship in game that isn't seeded by the game devs, which are very, very few items. A very simplified explanation of the market in EVE is the players take those minerals that they've either bought or have mined themselves, and through an industrial mechanic they produce nearly every item in game. Some of the more special or rare items are either low rate drops that are either kept by those players or sold on the market, or players also can run missions for many of the in-game factions and trade that factional rep in for items that they can again either keep or sell off to other players. But how has Star Citizen told us they intend to handle the in-game economy? Because it's very different. Let's look at it. Quantum is the behind-the-scenes system that supposedly will allow Star Citizen devs the ability to create and manage a realistic dynamic universe. It's supposed to do this by creating actions that NPCs will then perform to fulfill the in-game needs of each space system. So what exactly is the quantum economy model? In its simplest terms, it's Star Citizen's dynamic NPC/player-driven economic system that makes the game universe feel alive and responsive to our actions. The system was developed to simulate realistic economic behavior across the entire Star Citizen universe, and is even ultimately supposed to decide which missions are being offered to us, the players, at any given time. Imagine a universe where every item, every resource, or every job is influenced by both NPCs and players. That's what Quantum, or at least what we're being promised that Quantum is when delivered. However, unfortunately, apart from some demos that have been given to us at various times, we haven't seen really even a portion of this model reflected in the live game as of yet. It's supposed to offer us a real-time economy that reacts to supply and demand, creating opportunities and challenges for players. So how does it work, or I guess more specifically in our case, how is it supposed to work? So the Quanta system has control really over the NPCs, or Quanta as they call them and refer to them. And these NPCs will perform various jobs based on the needs determined by the Quanta system. So they'll be out mining, trading, manufacturing, and it will even determine where pirates and security end up deploying to. Each Quanta operates based on a supply and demand dynamic of what is needed or happening in each system, with the intent to simulate how a real economy works. I'm going to play a video from the director of the PU, Tony Zurovec.
Here I've selected a number of different product nodes, and you can see all of the economic relationships for those items laid out on the graph. The graph allows us to switch between several key flows, like the volume of goods, the flow of UEC, and even the value density of specific routes in the universe. The nodes are ordered by greatest to least economic activity, and changes over time will reorder them. We can thus detect important shifts in the economy simply by observing how the nodes adjust their position. This tool can inspect both real-time and historical data, so we can step back in time and see the progression of factors that caused a problem to develop and what could be done to remedy it. When inspecting a segment of time, you can see elements of the economy phasing in and out, depending upon whether or not they were relevant during that period. Often, we'll want to dig into a particular material to investigate how that material flows throughout the economy. With the Lazay graph, we can choose a material like aluminum, and then all of the items that metal is used to construct, which immediately gives us an intuitive view of the relationships between manufacturing recipes and system-wide logistics from a bird's-eye view. Here, it looks like most of the raw aluminum in the economy is being funneled into items that are being sold in shops on Crusader and ArcCorp. After a while, though, the shops at Crusader run short of inventory and stop selling such goods, and all the sales move to Hurston and ArcCorp. As new materials, recipes, and items are added to an increasingly complex universe, and player behaviors shift, we'll frequently run into such problems, and analytical tools like the Lazay graph will be invaluable in helping us to quickly identify such issues and determining what needs to be done to restore balance. Player actions are fed back into Quantum so that it can factor that data into the simulation, and Odin can evaluate that information just as easily as it can that derived from Quanta. It's fully linked into the law system, for example, and can thus generate a heat map showing where players are committing specific crimes. If there's too much PvP in an area that's supposed to be secure, we might add more security, place additional turrets, or increase the penalties levied by the law system. You can see a single quant exploration ship approaching the planet from the right. As it travels across the surface, it will unveil the quantity and location of that ore, visually represented by removing the shadow, and then broadcast that information to other quanta within its organization. It has discovered a huge vein of valuable ore, and quantum miners have now started arriving en masse to extract it. They're focusing predominantly on those areas where the concentration is known to be highest, although they'll also consider things like the amount of risk in a given area, perhaps caused by a player or NPC organization fighting to control that region. I'm running this at an accelerated rate, and you can see that the amount of ore at that first large site is declining rapidly. The explorer has now discovered a second field of gold ore near the equator, and because the original deposit has now been mined so extensively, what remains is more time-consuming and difficult to extract, and is thus relatively less attractive. The Quanta have figured this out, and most of them have started to focus their attention on the newer site. Taken together, these new features allow Quantum to generate a lot more detailed information, which will in turn result in a better and more realistic gameplay experience. Quantum will know where exactly on the surface of a planet NPCs might be found and what they should be doing. It will understand the value of knowledge and factor its acquisition, sharing, and sale into its calculations, including what any information you eventually attempt to sell would be worth. Quantum has now been pretty thoroughly integrated into our backend architecture, and the service will be built and shipped with all future releases of the game, which took a considerable amount of time and effort given how different some of its tools and technologies were versus what we had already set up and configured. There is still a tremendous amount of work to do on the simulation side, but we are getting close to the point at which portions of its simulated data will be an improvement over the algorithmic logic embedded into various services. We're going to do a bit more testing before we enable it to start injecting that data into the live game, though, and even then we're going to start very small and limit the focus to a few select areas so that we can work out any problems.
Now, for the sake of brevity, I cut that video up a lot. In its original form, it's about 40 minutes long, and I've linked it in the description of this video if you would like to go watch it in its entirety. So an in-game example of that might look something like the following. Suppose there is a high demand for iron in a particular sector because players are building a lot of things that need iron. Well, the quantum system will recognize this demand and increase mining operation in its response, thus sending out NPCs to firstly explore and discover maybe a rich vein of iron, and would then cause NPC miners to travel out and mine that ore. The system might also decide to impact this area with NPC pirates and again disrupt the pirates by maybe sending out security to deal with the threats, or maybe making a mission for players to go and destroy the pirates that are affecting these NPC miners. This ultimately in turn will affect the prices of iron and other related goods through this system, and by extension the rest of the universe. So how does this impact you or us as the players? The quantum model is supposed to ensure that the in-game market is always dynamic and evolving, that prices of goods fluctuate, that trade routes shift, and new opportunities arise based on both NPC and player activities. So this would mean as a trader you might find a lucrative trade route one day only to discover that tomorrow it's no longer as profitable or not profitable at all as the markets have changed. As a miner or manufacturer, you'll need to stay on top of which resources are in demand, or possibly even decide, should I sit on this particular amount of goods that I've just acquired? Should I store them away and hope that prices go up in the future? Or do I sell them now and collect the profits that are available to me currently? As a mercenary or pirate, you should be able to capitalize on the movements of valuable goods in trade ships, maybe even blockading certain routes to increase or decrease the price of those goods to your own benefit or someone else's detriment. The biggest problem with the quantum system is that we just don't have it, not even really a portion of it, as we were told it would be rolled out in small segments to begin testing. SIGA spent years telling us about the system in pretty great detail. It was actually difficult to decide which clips to include here and difficult to leave others out. But I didn't want to end up with an hour-long video of myself basically just reacting to a series of videos put out by the devs over the past 10 years on the subject. The biggest concern I have with the system is honestly its complexity. The more you read or watch about it, while it's an amazing concept, and if they're able to pull it off, even to a degree of how it's described, I think it will likely transform the game, maybe even more so than any other mechanic they could add, and that includes server meshing. But we were promised that we would start seeing more and more of this system go live, and it's just frustrating that we haven't gotten to experience it at all, really. The current in-game economy is barely deserving of the name. While sure, the prices fluctuate to some degree based on supply and an artificial demand, the recent dupers with RMC showed us that there is essentially a hard floor or bottom price, and that once that price is hit, it will just stay at that amount, regardless of however much is sold on the market. And I don't really understand the current demand system that's in place either. It essentially just seems to be a set demand of this station needs X number of this types of items over this given amount of time, and once reached, they just cut off the ability to sell any more of that item until it's refreshed. It'd make far more sense that the dupers would have just completely crashed their own market, to where the price you bought RMC for was just more than what buyers were willing to offer paying for it. But that's not what we saw or what we got, because the markets as it exists now is largely just a placeholder, and the same one that we've had for years now, with the exception of very few changes. It also makes me wonder, in EVE, when you open the market tab, you're interacting with other players. It makes the market feel very real. I know that I'm buying items off players, and I do wonder if Star Citizen's market being largely NPC controlled, if it'll make it somehow feel less real. It will certainly be less player driven for the most part, or at least potentially so. It's going to be a very delicate balance trying to create a game where the players feel impactful on the overall game while not having enough impact to completely crash a local market or exploit an overly complicated economic system. I'm also concerned with how we'll interact with the markets. Going to a POI and buying supplies is fine right now, but when player outposts come into the game, am I going to have to spend 3 hours flying from player outpost to player outpost, buying and selling, just loading and unloading cargo at each one? There's going to have to be a centralized market that you can interact with just for a pure quality of life standpoint. If there are 1,500 player outposts on Microtech, it's likely there will be far more than that. Then you have to have a way to see what's at each of them without having to visit, or buying or selling without having to visit each one of them. Then when it comes to actually buying something off players, if you want to buy 16 of X item and I find that there are only 8 locations on the same planet selling 2 at each, surely there will have to be a way for me to remotely purchase them and have them move to a centralized location for a nominal convenience fee. Otherwise, everyone's game is going to revolve around just shuffling cargo for 3 to 4 hours at a time. This also brings into the question of how the Banu Merchantman and the Kraken Privateer are going to work in game. Are we just going to end up with locations where 30 to 40 Merchantmen are parked and I now have to visit the space equivalent of a flea market? Is spending 3 hours running around a space flea market just to see what's sold at each ship really emergent or fun gameplay? Can I only visit these ships, Merchantman or Kraken, if the player is still logged into the game? If their ships persist when they're logged out, how will these ships be secured from hostile intent? The more I think about it and how the economy will operate, I'm often left with more questions than possible answers, and by extension, sometimes more concerns, as I really want them to get this right. They have to get this right. The quantum economy model, as described by the devs, would be an absolute game changer for Star Citizen. It would go a long way to making the universe feel actually alive and ever-changing. It would begin to bring about truly dynamic events and missions and encounters. But we really need an update on where it's at, and when can we expect to start to truly see it implemented in the game so we can start giving feedback. Thanks for watching again today, and if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like or subscribe if you enjoy this style of content. Leave a comment below on what aspect of the quantum economy you're most excited for or concerned about. And as always, see you in the verse.